The front end of the pristine SUV dipped with a sickening lurch, the tires spinning uselessly in the newly churned earth. Water, muddy and dark, began to seep into the floorboards as the vehicle settled deeper into the hidden trench. A woman's shriek, sharp and piercing, echoed across my property. I stood on my porch, a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand, and watched as her perfectly coiffed head popped out of the driver's side window, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She was trapped, her expensive car swallowed by the very path she insisted on using as her personal shortcut. What in the world was she going to do now? Life on the sprawling ranch had always been a sanctuary, a quiet escape from the hustle and bustle of city living. My name is Alex, and I'd poured my heart and soul into this land since inheriting it from my grandparents. The air was always clean, scented with pine and damp earth, and the only sounds that typically broke the silence were the chirping of crickets or the gentle lowing of my small herd of cattle. My driveway, a long, winding dirt road, was clearly marked, private property, no trespassing. It was a simple, common-sense rule, designed to protect my privacy and the integrity of the land. For years, everyone in the small community respected it. Then came the new development, Oakhaven Estates, a collection of McMansions that sprawled across what used to be peaceful farmland just beyond my northern fence line. With Oakhaven came the Homeowners Association, or HOA, and with the HOA came Ms. Deborah Albright, a woman who seemed to view regulations as her personal crusade and other people's property lines as mere suggestions. She was, in essence, an HOA Karen, a title she wore with an almost disturbing pride. It started subtly enough. A car would occasionally turn down my private road, mistaking it for a public thoroughfare. A quick wave, a polite explanation, and they would usually turn around, often with an apology. But then Ms. Albright moved in. Her property was at the very edge of Oakhaven, making my private road a tempting shortcut to the main highway, saving her a good 10 minutes of driving time. At first, it was just her. Her gleaming black SUV, always meticulously clean, would zip past my mailbox at an alarming speed, kicking up dust that settled on my porch and coated the leaves of my carefully tended garden. I tried the friendly approach first. I left a polite note on her windshield, reminding her that the road was private. The note disappeared, and so did any acknowledgement of my request. Next, I put up a bigger, bolder, private road sign, complete with a "No Through Traffic" addition. A mess. Albright seemed to treat it as a personal challenge. Her SUV continued its daily pilgrimage down my path, sometimes even twice a day. One afternoon, I was out tending to my vegetable patch when I saw her approaching. I stepped out, waving her down, hoping for a civil conversation. "Good afternoon, Ms. Albright," I began, trying to keep my voice even. "I wanted to talk to you about using my private road." She rolled down her tinted window, revealing eyes that were narrowed and a smile that didn't quite reach them. "Oh, hello there, Alex. What about it?" Her tone was dismissive, as if my concerns were trivial. "It's private property," I explained, gesturing to the sign she had just driven past. "It's not a public access road. I'd really appreciate it if you'd use the main roads for Oakhaven." A huff of impatience escaped her lips. "Well, it's just so convenient, isn't it? And frankly, it's a dirt road. What's the big deal? You're not using it for anything important, are you?" Her words stung. My dirt road was the access to my home, the path I used for my ranch operations, and the very connection to the life I cherished. "It's my property, Ms. Albright. It's a matter of privacy and respecting boundaries." She simply shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "Look, I'm a busy woman. That extra 10 minutes adds up. I'm sure you understand." And with that, she rolled up her window and drove off, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust, my frustration simmering. The incidents escalated. She started bringing friends down the road, and soon, a few other residents of Oakhaven, emboldened by her example, began to use it too. My attempts at polite dissuasion were met with blank stares, rude remarks, or simply ignored. It became a daily grind, a constant violation of my personal space. I felt my peace slowly eroding, replaced by a growing resentment. One particularly rainy week, the incessant traffic, combined with the heavy downpour, turned my well-maintained dirt road into a muddy mess. Deep ruts formed, and the once smooth path became a treacherous obstacle course. I spent hours filling potholes, dragging gravel, and trying to keep it passable, only for Ms. Albright to drive through it at top speed, splashing mud everywhere and undoing all my hard work. My patience, a finite resource, was rapidly dwindling. I finally reached out to the HOA. Surely, I thought, they'll understand. They're about rules and regulations. I spoke to the HOA president, a kindly older gentleman named Mr. Henderson, who listened patiently to my concerns. He assured me he would address it with Ms. Albright and send out a general reminder to all residents about respecting private property. A week later, I received a letter from the HOA. It was not, as I had hoped, a stern warning to Ms. Albright. Instead, it was a polite, yet firm, request for me to maintain my road to community standards, as it was causing inconvenience to some residents. Ms. Albright had apparently twisted the narrative, claiming my road was a public nuisance, not her usage of it. The letter also subtly implied that if I didn't improve the road, they might consider legal action to gain public access, citing some obscure easement clause that barely applied. My jaw dropped. This was beyond infuriating, it was an outright attack. My quiet ranch, my sanctuary, was under siege. My blood boiled. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, but then a different feeling started to bubble up, a feeling of determination. I wouldn't let them bully me off my own land, or dictate how I lived on it. That's when I started to think. Really think. My mind raced, contemplating every legal avenue, every possible solution. Nothing seemed to quite fit, nothing that would truly convey the message I needed to send without resorting to outright confrontation, which I desperately wanted to avoid. I needed something impactful, something that would make a lasting impression. The heavy rains continued, turning the ground soft and malleable. I watched Ms. Albright's SUV splash through another puddle, narrowly missing a small rabbit darting across the path. A sudden, audacious idea sparked in my mind, a risky but potentially effective way to make my point. It involved a shovel, a bit of strategic planning, and a whole lot of mud. I spent the next few days monitoring the weather forecast, waiting for the perfect window. The ground needed to be soft enough to dig easily, but not so waterlogged that the trench would immediately fill and become undetectable. A dry spell followed by a sudden, heavy downpour would be ideal. The day arrived. The morning was clear, the ground still damp from previous rains but firm enough to work with. I waited until I knew Ms. Albright would be out for the day, taking her usual route into town. With a deep breath and a sense of grim determination, I grabbed my sturdy shovel and headed to the section of the road just past the private property sign, where she always picked up speed. I started digging. It was hard work, sweat dripping into my eyes, but each scoop of earth felt like a small victory. I wasn't just digging a trench, I was drawing a line in the sand, a physical barrier to protect my peace. I focused on making it deep enough to be effective but not so deep as to be truly dangerous. I worked quickly, covering the exposed earth with a thin layer of topsoil and leaves to mask its true depth. It looked like an ordinary puddle, nothing more. Just as I finished, the sky, which had been clear only moments before, darkened dramatically. A rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and fat drops of rain began to fall. Perfect. The rain would further soften the ground around the trench, making it even more deceptive, and wash away any lingering signs of my recent excavation. I retreated to my porch, heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and grim satisfaction. I settled into my favorite rocking chair, coffee in hand, and waited. The rain intensified, drumming a steady rhythm on the tin roof, mimicking the beat of my anticipation. I knew she would be home soon. I knew she would take her usual shortcut. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, exactly what was about to happen. My eyes were fixed on the bend in the road, waiting for the glint of black paint, waiting for the inevitable. The stage was set. The shriek of Ms. Albright, high-pitched and laced with pure outrage, pierced the quiet morning. I watched from my porch as she struggled with her door, the muddy water now visibly sloshing around the interior of her luxury SUV. Her attempts to open the driver's side door were futile. The angle of the sunken vehicle had wedged it against the slick mud bank. She fumbled with the passenger door, finally pushing it open with a grunt of effort. Her designer heels, impractical for even solid ground, sank into the muck as she extricated herself from the car, her usually immaculate white blouse already sporting a fresh splatter of mud. She stood there, knees deep in the trench, looking from her submerged vehicle to my house, then back to her car, as if expecting it to magically levitate itself out of the predicament. Her face was a terrifying shade of crimson, her perfectly styled hair beginning to wilt in the damp air. She took a step towards my porch, then another, her progress slow and cumbersome through the sticky mud. I remained silent, a neutral expression on my face, but inside, a quiet satisfaction began to unfurl. This was, after all, precisely what I had intended. "Alex," she shrieked, her voice hoarse with indignation. "What have you done? My car. My brand new SUV." She gestured wildly at the vehicle, now settled even deeper as the ground continued to soften around it. You sabotaged my road." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "Ms. Albright," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the muddy expanse, "that's not your road. It's my private property. The signs are quite clear." Her jaw dropped, then snapped shut with an audible click. "This is outrageous. You can't just dig a hole in the middle of a road." "It's not the middle of a road, it's my driveway," I corrected gently. "And I can certainly dig a hole on my own land. I dug a drainage ditch, actually. The recent rains have made the ground quite soft, as you can see." I gestured vaguely at the sodden landscape, implying that her predicament was merely an unfortunate coincidence. She sputtered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Her gaze darted around, as if searching for an escape, a way to undo what had just happened. She looked utterly helpless, and for the first time since she arrived, I saw a flicker of something other than anger in her eyes, genuine panic. "You have to help me," she finally managed, her voice cracking. "You have to get my car out." I considered her for a moment, then sighed. "I suppose I could call a tow truck for you," I offered, not moving from my comfortable spot. "Though it's going to be a messy job. And likely quite expensive, given the situation." This seemed to snap her back to fury. "You did this. You'll pay for it. I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the HOA." She fumbled for her phone, her muddy hand struggling to grip the sleek device. Of course, her phone, like her car, was designed for pristine, dry environments, and it seemed to resist her frantic attempts to unlock it. While she wrestled with her phone, a familiar old pickup truck rumbled down the real road, the one the HOA wanted me to maintain, pulling up to my gate. It was my neighbor, an elderly rancher named Frank, who often stopped by for a chat. He killed the engine and squinted at the scene before him, then slowly unfolded himself from the cab. Frank had a kind face, weathered by years of working outdoors, and eyes that missed nothing. "Morning, Alex," he drawled, tipping his worn cowboy hat. His gaze then settled on Ms. Albright, still flailing in the mud next to her half-submerged SUV. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He'd witnessed Ms. Albright's daily commute through my property more than once and had offered his own gruff advice on how to handle it. "Well now, looks like someone's having a little trouble with the shortcut." Ms. Albright, hearing his voice, spun around, her eyes widening. She clearly wasn't accustomed to being seen in such a predicament. "This is none of your business," she snapped at Frank, her voice shrill. Frank chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "Oh, I reckon it is, ma'am. This here's Alex's private road. Been that way for as long as I can remember. Folks usually respect that." He looked at me, a knowing glint in his eye. "Looks like you finally got that drainage problem sorted, Alex." I gave him a subtle nod. "Indeed, Frank. The recent rains really highlighted the need for better water management." Ms. Albright's face turned an even deeper shade of purple. She knew Frank was in on it, that he was enjoying her misery. She struggled out of the trench, stumbling onto firmer ground, her designer clothes now thoroughly caked in mud. "You haven't heard the last of this," she vowed, shaking a muddy fist at me. "The HOA will deal with you. You'll be sorry." She hobbled back down my private road, a ridiculous figure, splashing through puddles, muttering to herself. She paused at her submerged SUV, glaring at it as if it had personally betrayed her. Then, with a final, furious glance in my direction, she turned and continued her muddy walk all the way back to Oakhaven, leaving her car to sink further. Frank walked over, shaking his head. "She'll learn, eventually," he said, leaning against my fence. "Sometimes folks need a little demonstration." He winked. "Good job, Alex. Real good job." We talked for a while, about the cattle, the weather, and the ever-encroaching development. Frank's presence was a comfort, a reminder that not everyone was like Ms. Albright. He was a pillar of the old community, where respect for land and neighbors was a given. His quiet approval was more valuable than any legal document. Later that day, the tow truck arrived. It was a massive, heavy-duty vehicle, capable of pulling even the most stubbornly stuck machinery. The driver, a burly man named Gus, surveyed the scene with a professional eye, then looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Heard about this one on the radio," he said, unhooking chains. "Someone got a little too friendly with a private drive, huh?" I simply offered a noncommittal shrug. Gus didn't need details, he'd seen it all. It took him a good 2 hours, a lot of winching, and a fair bit of cursing under his breath to finally extract Ms. Albright's SUV from the muddy trench. The vehicle was a wreck, mud caked inside and out, the front bumper torn, the suspension likely damaged. It was a costly lesson, delivered by Mother Nature and a strategically placed drainage ditch. Gus finally hauled the battered vehicle onto his flatbed, covered in mud himself. "That'll be a fun bill to explain," he muttered, more to himself than to me. For a few days, there was blissful silence. No black SUV sped down my road. No dust clouds lingered in the air. The peace I cherished slowly began to return. I spent my days working the ranch, enjoying the quiet, almost forgetting the recent drama. I even started to believe that Ms. Albright had finally learned her lesson, that the shock of her ruined SUV and the massive tow bill had been enough to deter her. But I should have known better. Ms. Albright was not one to admit defeat, especially not to someone she considered beneath her. The first sign that she hadn't given up came in the form of official-looking notices taped to my private road signs. Not from the HOA directly, but from a Community Enhancement Committee, a new entity I hadn't heard of. These notices declared my drainage ditch to be an unauthorized alteration of community access pathways and demanded its immediate filling. They threatened fines, increasing daily, if I did not comply. It was clearly Ms. Albright's doing, a desperate attempt to find a loophole, to use the convoluted rules of the HOA against me. I ignored them. The signs were on my property, and the committee had no jurisdiction. Yet, the brazenness of it infuriated me. She wasn't just using my road, she was trying to dictate what I could do on my own land. Then, one afternoon, I saw a small group of people gathered at the entrance to my road, right by the "private property" sign. Ms. Albright was there, of course, gesturing wildly, her voice carrying on the breeze. With her were two other women from Oakhaven, their expressions a mix of curiosity and mild disapproval, and a man I recognized as a new member of the HOA board, Mr. Peterson, a slick-looking individual who always wore expensive suits, even on weekends. They were pointing at my sign, then at the still visible indentation of the now-filled trench, and then at Ms. Albright's shiny, but clearly repaired, SUV parked a distance away on the public road. It looked like Ms. Albright was giving them a tour, regaling them with her version of events, painting me as the villain. I watched as Mr. Peterson nodded, stroking his chin, his gaze shifting from my property to Ms. Albright, then back. A shiver of unease ran down my spine. This wasn't just about a shortcut anymore. This was becoming a full-blown campaign. I knew, with a sinking feeling, that Ms. Albright was gathering her forces, preparing for a new kind of attack. And I had a terrible feeling about what might come next. The sight of Ms. Albright holding court at the entrance to my private road, whispering conspiratorially with Mr. Peterson and the other Oakhaven residents, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. It was clear she was fabricating a story, painting me as an unreasonable recluse, perhaps even a danger to the community. I watched them for a while, hidden by the thick brush near my fence line, listening intently. A mess. Albright's voice, though hushed, carried snippets of her dramatic tale. He deliberately set a trap. My car could have been totaled, a hazard to our children. The last part was a particularly nasty touch, designed to stir fear and anger. Mr. Peterson nodded along, his expression serious, making notes on a small tablet. This was no longer just about a shortcut, it was about reputation, power, and perhaps even control over my property. My initial feeling was one of intense anger, but beneath it, a sense of weary resignation began to settle in. How could I fight against such blatant manipulation and outright lies? It felt like a small rancher against a well-oiled, wealthy machine. But then, as I watched Ms. Albright's performative outrage, a different emotion surfaced, a quiet, stubborn defiance. This was my land, my home, and I would not let them dictate how I lived on it. I decided then and there that I would face this head-on, but on my own terms. That evening, I did some research. I meticulously reviewed the property deeds, the old survey maps, and even the local county ordinances regarding private roads and easements. Everything confirmed what I already knew. My road was unequivocally private, with no public access or easements granted to Oakhaven Estates. I compiled a thick folder of documents, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The next morning, a formal letter arrived from the HOA, this time on official letterhead, signed by Mr. Peterson as chair of the Community Safety and Access Committee. It was even more aggressive than the previous notices. It stated that my unmarked and unsafe trench posed a significant risk to community members and demanded its immediate and permanent filling. It outlined a series of escalating fines, starting at a hefty sum and doubling each day if I did not comply. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat of legal action, implying they would pursue an injunction to force me to comply and seek damages for Ms. Albright's vehicle. My hands trembled slightly as I read it, but it wasn't from fear. It was from a quiet, burning rage. They were trying to strong-arm me, to intimidate me into submission. They were using the very rules designed to protect communities to harass an individual. I crumpled the letter in my fist, then smoothed it out, a plan beginning to form in my mind. Instead of calling a lawyer immediately, which was my first instinct, I decided to try a different approach. I remembered the words of my grandmother, sometimes, honey, the best way to fight a bully isn't with a punch, but with a smile and a good, strong fence. I couldn't fence off the entire road without making it inaccessible for myself, but I could make my point in a way that was undeniably legal and undeniably visible. The following day, I got to work. I drove into town and bought the heaviest, most durable, bright orange safety cones I could find. I bought rolls of bright yellow, caution, private property, tape. I bought a large, industrial-grade metal sign that read, in bold red letters, Private Road, No Trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted, with a smaller line underneath stating, this road is for ranch access only. No through traffic. I also picked up a few bags of quick-setting concrete. The real surprise came when I pulled out the post hole digger. Instead of filling the trench, I spent the afternoon digging a series of deep, narrow post holes along both sides of my private road, starting from the main public road all the way up to where the trench had been. I worked methodically, sweat pouring down my face, but a sense of purpose driving me forward. My intent was not to build a full fence yet, but to create a highly visible, undeniable barrier. Once the post holes were dug, I cemented heavy, thick wooden posts into place, spacing them just far enough apart that a vehicle couldn't easily drive between them, but wide enough for me to maneuver my ranch vehicles. I then strung multiple lines of the bright yellow, caution, tape between the posts, creating a visual maze. At the entrance, on the largest post, I mounted my new, imposing metal sign, ensuring it was clearly visible to anyone approaching. And just before the section where the trench had been, I placed 2 of the bright orange safety cones, directly in the path of where Ms. Albright's SUV had sunk. They were practically glowing against the dusty road. The transformation was dramatic. My private road, once just a dirt track, now looked like a barricaded construction zone. It was impossible to ignore. It screamed, private property, with every fiber of its being. I stood back, wiping my brow, a small, triumphant smile playing on my lips. It wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. It was legal. And it was impossible to miss. I knew Ms. Albright and the HOA would see it. I knew they would be furious. I waited, anticipating the next move, like a chess player after a strategic play. The quiet of the ranch felt different now, imbued with a tense anticipation. The next morning, just as the sun was beginning to warm the air, I heard it, the distinct sound of multiple vehicles pulling up to the entrance of my road. I peered through my kitchen window. It was a delegation. Ms. Albright was there, of course, her face already a thundercloud. With her were Mr. Peterson and several other serious-looking individuals, some carrying clipboards, others looking visibly annoyed. They stood there, gawking at my new, brightly colored barricade, at the prominent signs, at the caution tape fluttering in the breeze. Ms. Albright's voice, though I couldn't make out the words, was clearly agitated, a rapid-fire torrent directed at Mr. Peterson. He, in turn, looked increasingly uncomfortable, surveying the scene, then looking at his clipboard, then back at the barricade. There was no denying it now, my road was undeniably, unmistakably, private. They couldn't claim it was a public access path, not with all this. As they debated, a small group of children, perhaps from Oakhaven, came skipping down the public road, laughing and pointing at the bright orange cones and yellow tape. They stopped, curious, then turned to their parents, who were now approaching to see the commotion. The parents, seeing the signs, quickly ushered their children away, clearly understanding the message. The sight of innocent children being potentially exposed to a hazard, even a self-inflicted one like Ms. Albright's initial incident, would not look good for the HOA if this escalated. Ms. Albright, realizing her audience was expanding, puffed herself up, ready to launch into another tirade. But before she could, Mr. Peterson held up a hand, his expression stern. He seemed to be trying to calm her, to explain something. He then walked closer to my new main sign, reading it carefully, his brows furrowed. The conversation grew more intense, Ms. Albright clearly arguing with him, while the other HOA members looked increasingly exasperated. It was a clear power struggle unfolding before my eyes. They hadn't expected this level of commitment, this undeniable statement. I could almost hear their internal debate. Was it worth the legal fight, the potential public relations nightmare, for a shortcut they had no right to in the first place? The ball was now in their court, and I waited, ready for whatever they would throw at me next. The tension was palpable. The sight of Ms. Albright arguing with Mr. Peterson, framed by my newly barricaded private road, felt like a small victory. Their hushed but intense conversation continued for what seemed like ages, punctuated by Ms. Albright's indignant gestures and Mr. Peterson's attempts to calm her down. The other HOA members present shifted uncomfortably, clearly not enjoying the spectacle. My strategic placement of the signs and tapes had undeniably shifted the narrative. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore, it was clear, physical proof of privacy. Eventually, the delegation dispersed, Ms. Albright shooting one last venomous glare in the direction of my house before stomping off. Mr. Peterson paused, looking back at my fortified entrance, a thoughtful, almost weary expression on his face. I knew then that my message had been received, loud and clear. For a few days, a fragile peace settled over the ranch once more. The constant worry about trespassers, the daily dust clouds, and the persistent feeling of invasion lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. I spent my days enjoying the solitude, working my land, and relishing the renewed sense of ownership. However, the calm was short-lived. A week later, a registered letter arrived, not from the HOA, but from a law firm representing Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association Incorporated. The letter was formal and intimidating, a wall of legal jargon threatening an injunction against me for obstructing community access and demanding the removal of my unauthorized structures. It also included a thinly veiled threat of legal action for damages related to Ms. Albright's vehicle, even though her original incident was clearly a result of her own trespassing. They were trying to scare me into compliance with the full weight of their legal department. This time, my hands did tremble, not from anger, but from a genuine concern. Legal battles were expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. I was a rancher, not a lawyer. I knew my rights, but navigating the legal system felt like a daunting task. I showed the letter to Frank, my neighbor, when he stopped by. He read it, his brow furrowed, then let out a low whistle. "They ain't messing around, Alex," he said, rubbing his chin. "You need a good lawyer, one who understands property rights." Frank was right. I couldn't fight this alone. I contacted a lawyer specializing in property law in the nearest big city, recommended by a friend of Frank's. Her name was Brenda Riley, and she had a reputation for being tough but fair. During our first meeting, I laid out all the documents, my deeds, the survey maps, the HOA's letters, and even photographs of Ms. Albright's SUV stuck in the trench. Brenda listened intently, her expression unreadable. "Alex," she said, leaning forward, "you have a very strong case. Your property is clearly marked, and there's no easement granting them access. Their claim of community access is baseless. They're trying to bully you." She explained the legal process, the potential for a drawn-out court battle, but also assured me of my strong position. However, she added, litigation is always a last resort. It's expensive for both sides. Sometimes, a strong, clear message from our end can make them reconsider. Brenda sent a detailed letter back to the HOA's law firm. It was a masterpiece of legal counter-argument, citing all relevant property laws, reiterating my ownership, and firmly denying any liability for Ms. Albright's self-inflicted incident. It also pointed out that their continued harassment could lead to a countersuit for trespass and nuisance. The ball was back in their court, but this time, it was a much heavier ball, delivered by a professional. For a few more weeks, the situation remained in a tense stalemate. No more letters arrived, and Ms. Albright's SUV was conspicuously absent from my private road. The peace on the ranch was almost perfect, marred only by the underlying hum of legal uncertainty. I focused on my work, trying to distract myself, but the thought of a court battle lingered in the back of my mind. Then came the escalation I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a legal threat, but something far more insidious and personal. One morning, I woke to find my main water line, which ran along the edge of my property near the public road, inexplicably severed. A clean cut, as if done with a power tool, had left water gushing onto the ground, turning the earth into a muddy bog. My heart sank. This was beyond property disputes, this was an act of deliberate sabotage. I knew, with a terrible certainty, who was behind it. Ms. Albright, or someone acting on her behalf, was escalating the conflict in a dangerous way. This was no longer just about a shortcut, it was an act of petty revenge, designed to disrupt my life and force me to concede. I spent the next few hours frantically digging, finding the break, and patching the pipe. It was a messy, frustrating job, and it left me with a bitter taste in my mouth. This was a direct attack on my livelihood, on my home. It was a clear violation, and I knew I couldn't let it go unaddressed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, I sat on my porch, feeling a deep weariness in my bones. The beauty of the sunset felt almost mocking in contrast to the ugliness of the day's events. The water line wasn't just a utility, it was vital for my livestock, for my home. This was a line that Ms. Albright had crossed, a line that shifted the dynamic from a property dispute to something far more serious. I knew I had to respond, but how? Physical retaliation was out of the question. Legal action for something so difficult to prove seemed unlikely to yield swift justice. As I pondered my options, a new idea began to form, something that was both undeniably legal and yet incredibly disruptive to their perfectly manicured world. It was a plan that involved leveraging the very thing they valued most, their image, their carefully constructed facade of an orderly, harmonious community. It would require careful timing, a bit of boldness, and a public platform. This act had pushed me too far, and now, I would push back, not with a shovel, but with something far more powerful. A cold resolve settled in my heart. The game, it seemed, was escalating. And I was ready to play. The severed water line was a stark and infuriating reminder that Ms. Albright, or someone acting on her behalf, had crossed a dangerous boundary. This wasn't merely a dispute over property lines, it was a malicious act designed to harm. The anger that simmered beneath my calm exterior solidified into a cold, determined resolve. I patched the pipe, but the image of the gushing water and the wasted resource burned in my mind. This kind of petty vandalism, though hard to definitively prove in court without a witness, demanded a response, but one that was smarter, more impactful, and completely legal. My lawyer, Brenda, agreed that proving who cut the water line would be difficult without direct evidence. "It's a tough one, Alex," she'd said over the phone. "We can send a cease and desist, but unless we catch them in the act, or they admit it, it'll be their word against yours. And they're likely to deny it vehemently." This meant I needed a different strategy, one that didn't rely on catching a culprit red-handed but instead leveraged the glaring inconsistencies of the situation. They wanted to portray me as a problem, a recluse, a hazard. I would turn that narrative on its head. The idea that had sparked the previous evening began to take shape. It involved the one thing the HOA and Ms. Albright valued above all else, their pristine image. Oakhaven Estates marketed itself as an idyllic, harmonious community, a haven of peace and order. But behind the manicured lawns and matching mailboxes, there was a nasty undercurrent of bullying and intimidation. I decided it was time to expose that. I started by taking photographs. Lots of them. I photographed the freshly repaired section of my water line, showing the clean cut. I photographed the Community Enhancement Committee notices taped to my private road signs, clearly showing they were on my property. I photographed the bright orange cones and caution tape, highlighting how clearly marked my private road was. I even went back and took pictures of the muddy ruts that had formed on my road from Ms. Albright's repeated use, contrasting them with the now-filled trench. I compiled all the previous letters from the HOA and their lawyers, too. My folder of evidence grew thicker, painting a clear picture of their aggressive and unfounded actions. My plan involved attending the next Oakhaven HOA board meeting. I knew it would be a public forum, and while residents could speak, there were usually time limits and strict rules. However, I wasn't just going to speak, I was going to perform a quiet, undeniable act of demonstration. The day of the HOA meeting arrived. I dressed simply but neatly, in clean jeans and a plain shirt, wanting to project the image of a straightforward rancher, not an aggressive provocateur. I carried my thick folder of documents and photographs. The meeting was held in the Oakhaven Community Center, a sleek, modern building that felt alien compared to my rustic home. The room was packed, filled with residents, some familiar, many not. Ms. Albright was there, of course, seated front and center, looking self-important. Mr. Peterson sat at the head table with other board members, looking every bit the confident, unruffled leader. When the time came for community comments, I calmly raised my hand. Mr. Peterson, clearly recognizing me, hesitated for a moment, then, with a forced smile, called on me. Yes, Mr. Alex, please keep your comments concise. I walked to the podium, placing my heavy folder on it with a deliberate thud. My voice, though not loud, carried clearly through the room. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex, and I own the ranch bordering Oakhaven Estates. I paused, letting that sink in. Many residents exchanged glances, curiosity etched on their faces. I'm here tonight to talk about something I believe affects the integrity of this community, respect for private property, and unfortunately, harassment. Ms. Albright shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mr. Peterson's forced smile tightened. For months now, I continued, a resident of Oakhaven has been repeatedly trespassing on my private ranch road, despite clear and prominent, private property signs. I paused, then picked up a large, blown-up photograph of my main private road sign, holding it up for everyone to see. This sign, which has been in place for years, makes it clear that my road is not for public use. I then displayed a photo of Ms. Albright's SUV stuck in the trench. This is a picture of that resident's vehicle after it drove into a drainage ditch on my private property during a period of heavy rain. I let the murmurs ripple through the room. Ms. Albright began to whisper furiously to the person next to her, but I kept my focus on the room. After this incident, instead of respecting my property, I received these. I pulled out the Community Enhancement Committee notices, holding them up. Notices, with escalating fines, demanding I fill a drainage ditch on my own property, claiming it was an unauthorized alteration of community access pathways. I scoffed lightly. A private road is not a community access pathway. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. Mr. Alex, your time is limited. Please stick to the issue. The issue, Mr. Peterson, I responded, my voice firm, is that some individuals in this community are attempting to bully and intimidate me into giving up my property rights. And it's not just verbal harassment. Last week, I announced, my voice dropping slightly for dramatic effect, my main water line was deliberately cut, depriving my home and my livestock of water. I held up the picture of the cut pipe. Gasps filled the room. This was a new escalation for most of the residents. A mess. Albright shot to her feet. He's lying. This is absurd. He's just trying to cause trouble. Mr. Peterson slammed his gavel. Ms. Albright, please. You'll have your turn if you wish to speak. He looked at me, a flicker of something resembling concern in his eyes. He clearly hadn't expected me to bring up the water line, or to present such a compelling visual narrative. I have no desire to cause trouble, I stated, looking directly at the residents, not at the board. I simply wish to live peacefully on my land. My road is clearly marked, and I have legal documentation proving it is private. I gestured to my folder. I have all the deeds, surveys, and letters here, if anyone wishes to review them after the meeting. Then, I delivered the kicker, the point that would directly target their image. It seems to me that the Oakhaven HOA, or at least certain members, are more interested in intimidating a private landowner than in fostering genuine community harmony. This kind of aggressive, harassing behavior, including property damage, reflects poorly on Oakhaven Estates as a whole. Is this the kind of community you truly want to live in? One where private property rights are disregarded and honest neighbors are harassed? A buzz of conversation erupted. Residents turned to each other, whispering, some looking at Ms. Albright with new, critical eyes. Her face was contorted in a mixture of fury and shock. She had expected me to be easily dismissed, but I had laid out a case that was difficult to refute, especially with photographic evidence. Mr. Peterson looked utterly flustered, trying to regain control of the meeting. I stepped back from the podium, leaving my folder prominently displayed. The silence that followed my statement was deafening, quickly replaced by a wave of agitated murmurs. I could feel the shift in the room, the sudden doubt in the minds of many residents. The carefully constructed facade of Oakhaven Estates, the one Ms. Albright so diligently upheld, had just been publicly cracked. The meeting was about to get very interesting. The murmurs in the Oakhaven Estates Community Center swelled into outright chatter after my presentation. A mess. Albright was on her feet again, red-faced and furious, attempting to shout over the growing noise, but her voice was lost in the cacophony. Mr. Peterson, looking utterly beleaguered, repeatedly pounded his gavel, trying to restore order. The public exposure of their tactics, especially the cutting of my water line, had clearly hit a nerve with the other residents. They weren't just curious anymore, many looked genuinely disturbed. Finally, Mr. Peterson managed to quiet the room, but the atmosphere remained thick with tension. He gave Ms. Albright a pointed look. Ms. Albright, please. We need to hear all sides calmly. He then turned to the room. The board will take these allegations under advisement. We appreciate Mr. Alex's concerns and will review the matter thoroughly. It was a politician's non-answer, designed to defuse the immediate situation, but the seeds of doubt had been firmly planted. I collected my folder, feeling a quiet satisfaction. My goal wasn't to win a debate then and there, but to shift public opinion, to make the residents question the narrative Ms. Albright had been spinning. As I walked out, several residents stopped me, offering quiet words of support, some even sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's heavy-handedness or Ms. Albright's domineering personality. This unexpected show of solidarity gave me a vital boost. The next few days were surprisingly quiet. No more letters arrived, no more mysterious visitors. The barricades on my road remained untouched. It seemed my public demonstration had, at least temporarily, put the HOA on the defensive. I worked on my ranch, feeling a renewed sense of peace, daring to hope that perhaps, finally, the ordeal was over. But Ms. Albright was not one to accept defeat, especially not publicly. Her pride had been wounded, her authority challenged in front of her peers. I should have known she wouldn't let it go. The escalation came not from the HOA this time, but from Ms. Albright herself, and it was a bold, desperate move. One morning, I awoke to the ominous hum of heavy machinery. Looking out my window, my blood ran cold. A large construction crew, complete with a bulldozer and several dump trucks, was gathered at the entrance to my private road. And standing there, directing them with imperious gestures, was Ms. Albright. My heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and fury. She wasn't just trying to argue with me or fine me anymore, she was attempting to physically alter my property. The bulldozer rumbled, its massive blade poised to begin scraping away my barricades, the carefully placed posts, and the very ground of my private road. She was going to force a community access path through my ranch, unilaterally and illegally. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and immediately called Brenda, my lawyer, explaining the frantic situation. Brenda, they're here. A bulldozer. Ms. Albright is trying to build a road through my property. Brenda's voice, usually calm, was sharp with urgency. "Alex, do not engage them physically. Do not get in front of the machinery. Get clear, but document everything. Take photos, videos. I'm calling the sheriff's department and filing an emergency injunction immediately. This is a clear act of trespass and property damage." I followed her instructions to the letter. I ran outside, keeping a safe distance, but furiously snapping pictures and recording video on my phone. Ms. Albright saw me, and her face contorted into a triumphant, sneering grin. She waved her hand at the bulldozer operator, clearly giving him the signal to start. The engine roared louder, and the bulldozer began to move forward, its blade scraping against the earth, tearing into the signs and tape I had put up. Posts splintered, wood cracked, and the ground was churned into a messy, scarred path. It was a brutal, sickening sight, watching my property being deliberately destroyed before my eyes. "Stop! You have no right!" I yelled, though my voice was drowned out by the machinery. Ms. Albright laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "This is for the good of the community, Alex. You can't stop progress." Just then, a sheriff's patrol car, sirens wailing, sped down the public road and screeched to a halt at the entrance to my property. 2 deputies jumped out, their expressions grim. They immediately spotted the bulldozer, the ongoing destruction, and Ms. Albright's commanding presence. "Stop all activity immediately," one of the deputies bellowed, his voice carrying surprising authority even over the roar of the machinery. The bulldozer operator, startled, cut the engine. A sudden, profound silence descended upon the ranch. Ms. Albright, her triumphant smirk dissolving, spun around. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice rising in indignation. "This is an authorized community improvement project." The deputy, a stern-faced woman named Officer Davies, strode towards her, her hand resting on her sidearm. "Ma'am, we have received reports of illegal trespass and property damage. Do you have a permit for this work? Written authorization from the landowner?" Ms. Albright stammered, "Well, the HOA, we are the HOA." "The HOA does not supersede private property law, ma'am," Officer Davies stated flatly. "This is clearly marked private property. You are illegally destroying someone else's land. This is a criminal offense." She then looked at the bulldozer operator. "You are to cease all operations. Any further movement and you will be arrested." The operator, a burly man who clearly wanted no part of a legal dispute, nodded nervously. Just as Officer Davies was reading Ms. Albright her rights, explaining the charges of criminal trespass and property damage, another vehicle pulled up. It was a sleek black car, and out stepped Brenda Riley, my lawyer, followed by another lawyer, an older gentleman in a pristine suit. Brenda walked straight towards the officers, handing them a copy of the emergency injunction she had just secured, halting all activity on my property and prohibiting Ms. Albright from coming within 500 feet of my land. Ms. Albright watched, her face draining of color as she realized the depth of the legal trouble she was in. She tried to protest, to argue, but the deputies were firm. They handcuffed her, calmly explaining that she was being arrested. As they led her past me, her eyes met mine. There was no anger, no fury, just a look of utter, profound defeat. The HOA Karen, who had terrorized my peace, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. The bulldozer sat silent, a testament to her reckless ambition. My road was damaged, but it was my damage, and it could be repaired. The quiet returned to the ranch, but this time, it felt different. It was a true, lasting peace, earned through resilience and the unwavering protection of what was mine. The battle was over, and the ranch, my beloved sanctuary, was finally safe. The sun was rising higher, casting long, peaceful shadows over the land, a new day dawning for me and my home.